So welcome to this next episode of this series of podcasts, Opening Up in Lockdown. Normally you'd be hearing Patrick's voice, you will in a minute. My name is Ollie John, I'm the manager of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and I'm really pleased and quite honoured to be speaking to Patrick today and finding out a bit more around his interests, his ideas behind this project, his thoughts on the relationship between art and mental health, and how he's got involved in this work really. So Patrick, thanks for your time. Thanks for doing all this work, and great to be here with you.
Thanks so much. I think you're a better presenter than me. Yeah, nice to have a chat about some of the things. Perhaps have got me this long old journey to where I am now. Which it's a long old way. Looking back, it's black and white, as my kids say.
Well, no, I'm sure it's. Well, I know it's an interesting journey, and thank you for giving up your time and we'll try not to be too harsh, but I'm sure there's a lot of nugget in there for a lot of people to kind of pick through. So I think the first question, and it's something you've asked many of your guests throughout all of this, and I think it's really interesting, particularly as I have a bit of an insight into some of your answers here, around kind of what's been your journey to the arts, to some of the projects you've been working on, and kind of arriving at the artist and poet and playwright that you are today.
It's looking back to when I was thinking when I'm asking the questions to the guests we've had. You look back at your own starting point, and it's a long way back, a lot of meandering roads, and in a way, I was quite late. I was terrible at school. I hated poetry. I had a stutter, so I could never read out Shakespeare and poetry. When it was my turn in school, I would go red. And I just hated all that attention, really. And I never understood Shakespeare or Chaucer. So I was quite late coming to writing, really. It was mostly music, I suppose, was my sort of education, really, coming at the tail end of punk, going into sort of new wave and heavy metal, really. That was my sanctuary, really. But I always loved the words. I loved the sort of the feeling of being connected to and being, part of something, listening to an album, etc. So that always stayed with me. And I think that led to the step then into discovering literature, which was when I sort of, I went to Swansea University. Again, don't know how I got there, but I managed to get my A-levels, get into Swansea, and to go away from Blackwood was like a massive adventure, really. I'd never been away by myself, really, and heading to Swansea, which seemed as if it was going to, London for me. And that world opened up then of words, and I discovered American literature, Jack Kerouac, Ralph Ellison, Maya Angelou, Allen Ginsberg. Suddenly I just thought, writing is actually quite sexy. It's quite romantic. It's about real life, which I had never really been taught that or felt it. So I always thought, way poetry was for Oxford and Cambridge educated people. So I suppose there was a eureka moment, and it was something to do with it was Tennessee Williams, funny enough, the playwright, and he had written a poem called Lament for Moths, and I always remember that moment because he wasn't known as a poet. And I read this poem called Lament for Moths, and it was just like this idea of being yourself and just saying, no, I can be myself against these huge mammoth figures. So I suppose I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder. I'd been bullied in school. And that spoke to me. It made me think, yeah, okay, I can do this. I can be who I want to be, I suppose. And so Tennessee Williams really opened up that world, 35 years ago.
I mean, was there something unique about America, maybe? I mean, knowing some of the names you mentioned there.
American literature just seemed a little bit more exciting, passionate, engaged, radical, being unafraid to, to spill its soul type of thing. So that's how it all started. I started writing, I remember sending my first pile of poems when I was about 23 off to Faber and Faber, as if I had any chance. And it came back unopened, my package of poems, which, with one, I always remember it was in a green pen, which was really faded out as if the person couldn't be asked to even look at the poems, which of course I understand that now. But when I was my, idealistic self, you do those things. And I think you have to do those things. And I think that, talking about a bit of a cycle now, we look at sometimes instant fame, instant celebrity. And whenever I go into schools and that, I try and explain how this long journey of, if you're going to be an athlete or a singer, it's a long old battle. And so, yes, of course, I was a bit disappointed. What, Faber and Faber didn't like my poems. They still don't. But it's like an apprenticeship, I think, and you really got to dig deep. And yeah, it was all just about experience in life and writing. And then I went back. No, I came back from America, finished my degree, and then wanted to save some money to go back to America to write the great Welsh American novel. And for some reason, I was obsessed with the Channel Tunnel and getting a job working like sort of a Jack Kerouac, Jack London figure.
Oh, okay.
I know, not as romantic as America. I didn't get any work on the Channel Tunnel, I remember, and I ended up in Herne Bay, which is on the coast near Dungeness in Kent. It was called a CSV, which is Community Service Volunteers. Nothing to do with prisons or anything. It was all right. Community Service Volunteers. And they paid you £15 a week and your accommodation, which was a lot of money in those days, well, not a lot, but it was, and I lived there, lived on the coast, saved up some money, wrote endless poems and dreamt of escaping again, escaping off to America. And then I went back to America in 1992 then. And going back, I suppose then, when I think about it, I worked with young offenders, ironically enough, in Herne Bay, and I had a weekend job at a mental health. It was like a halfway house, I suppose, where people would go to in between, perhaps coming from long-term care back into the community. And it was a great learning curve. I was just an assistant there, and I worked with psychiatrists and nurses. So I had these two jobs, all about people really, and I just like that sort of work. I like people work, and I like sort of sharing stories and trying to. I would be offering poems idealistically, and in those days in the work, or setting up five-a-side football things. It was just that sort of job which I really enjoyed, and we so I think in a way, going back to when I started when I was much more confident in my mid-30s, doing more work in the community as a writer, then I always wanted to sort of go back to those worlds, because I knew the benefit of the arts, really, I think, from the other side of just working as a care assistant for probably about £2.50 an hour in those days, and just seeing the little benefits of those triggers, which I hadn't thought about for a while. But I think the inception of where you go in life, sometimes there's little seeds planted along the way, perhaps.
Yeah, no, that's we'll obviously we'll go into a bit of discussion about some of the recent projects, but it's really interesting to find that actually, reflecting on it, that's seemingly had quite a big impact on how you utilised your workshops, your approach to your work as well, from things you did in
my early 20s.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely.
So yeah, that's where it all sort of started, really. I remember I didn't get a poem published probably till I was living in America, till about 1991 or something like that. So a long old journey, like I said, sort of thing. Yeah, but I think it's that idea of, if you're writing or you're painting or you're making music and you do it every day, believe in yourself, really, and you don't have to suddenly have huge commissions and
what was that feeling like when you I don't want to say the word finally, but finally got that poem published?
Yeah, it was a lovely moment. Yeah, it really it was. A little tiny little magazine arrived. I was in Chicago living. You thought you had arrived. I remember going to poetry readings and opening up this little pamphlet and sharing those poems. Maybe a bit deluded along the way, but I think you need that sometimes as an artist, I suppose, as a writer, because if no one else believes in you, you've got to believe in yourself a bit. So it's that balance between not giving up and being slightly, away with the theories a bit, to dream and to push what you need to do, if you know what I mean. It's a strength. It's an armor, perhaps.
Just along this journey, and again, it's interesting to find out that, maybe your first love was music, and different types of music. I mean, I guess that kind of short period of time when it was kind of new wave and then heavy metal, and before that, I remember, and I think you told me years ago, Rush was kind of one of your first influences.
Yeah, they were one of my, yeah, and again the words to Rush were always very interesting and challenging, and they weren't like you know a lot of metal bands. They were really into Tolkien and poetry and Coleridge, etc. So yeah, but ultimately I disliked the guitars.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it was, I think it goes back again, you know, when we're growing up, it's nice to have something you can link into. It could be sport, it could be boxing, training, biking, you know. It was something that protected me a little bit in my world, in my sanctuary. And I remember buying a guitar, saving up in the summer. It was £65 from Kay's catalogue. My mum had this catalogue, this massive catalogue. I don't know if you remember catalogues all.
Yeah, I remember just about.
You
Yeah.
do, yes. And so this guitar, oh, it was just beautiful. So I saved up some money. I couldn't play it. I played a few chords, and then I got a fuzz box, which makes it really, you know, the sound. And so yeah, I couldn't play, but I would just make these noises, really sound in my room. And again, it emboldens you, I think, and gives you a little bit of a sense of, yeah, you know, self perhaps.
Yeah.
So yeah, fan inception, music to poetry to plays. Yeah, it's just a journey of, and I just love building things, I suppose, with words. My dad was a builder. He could build a wall, you know, which would baffle me. I wouldn't know where to start. And I suppose in a way, when I look back now, building words and plays, worlds really, that's my way of creating things, you know, if you know what I mean. So and to this day, it is that sense of, you know, there's nothing better than a new notebook, and you dive in and you start again. So hopefully I haven't lost you know, that spirit of creation, which I always try and impart when I go into workshops in hospitals. And I never try and wear a veneer of some, you know, expert on writing, because every day, you know, you're learning a new way of writing, I suppose, and new ideas. So I always try and be just trying to have that spirit of, I suppose, excitement about words to share with other people. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I know you interviewed Alex Wharton recently, and he touched upon very similar things when he developed workshops with young people around building. And, you know, and that's a very digestible way for people to understand and to feel comfortable creating a piece of work. And I think he used the expression building dreams, which was really nice.
Yeah.
And it is about that, you know, it is about a bit of optimism. You know, you can touch upon some subjects. That's what it appears to me certainly to be.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting phrase, which I just listening to some of these podcast series has come out time and time again.
Yeah. And I think we need those. And I think, you know, from schools to mental health units to hospitals, sometimes, you know, perhaps I even underestimate the power of a poem you share. And you can see a light bulb goes off in someone, and they write something, or they tell you a story if they're not able to write. And it's hard to put a tick box to say how important that is, but it's a beautiful way of, you know, yeah, just again, that sense of self and thinking, yeah, I can do this. I've got a voice. I've got a story to tell. And I think that's one of the most important things I feel about that work I do in the community, and Alex going into schools where, you know, creative writing in schools is almost like so undervalued, and so you know, particularly comprehensive schools, it's just almost non-existent. You know, this idea of expression, which I think is very important to us all, really, as humans. So yeah.
Coming from a little bit of a place where you've mentioned already some of maybe artists who've influenced your writing, you know, particularly some American, and that I'm sure there are many currently as well who still influence you. But maybe alongside artists, people who've influenced you to pursue you know, different things throughout your career. Are there any which particularly spring to mind?
That's quite interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Do you mean? Interesting. No one in school really. No teachers. You know, sometimes people go back to a teacher, and no, pretty bad experience in school really overall. When I went to sixth form college, yeah, there was a tutor I always remember called Brian Davis, who taught politics, and he told us to always by The Guardian in the week. And I always remember that, and I thought that was quite interesting, at 16, that's quite a revelation. Usually it was just the NME or sounds, that's all I would, my reading. And Brian always, he just treated you a little bit more grown up. So he was quite pivotal, I think, in me carrying on with learning and writing. And then in university, quite a few beautiful tutors there who just loved literature and sparked the sort of passion for creative writing and being yourself in particular. Then the world of work is quite a few. Yeah, like I said, I lived in America and I worked in a Montessori school, which was a fantastic way of education. And there was a teacher there. She was called Story Shearer. I always remember Story. She was really calm and gentle. I was just her assistant in the class, teaching these lovely, idealistic, 8-9-year-olds kids. And she was a great role model about channeling, because I was a bit crazy, sort of, in the sense that I thought education should be totally dismantled and anything goes. But she sort of channeled it and said, well, sometimes you need the basics to explode it. You need to find the basics, then you can radicalize it, sort of thing. And little tips like that along the way. And I enjoyed working in that atmosphere.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And one thing that you've asked your guests, which I think has been really, really interesting, and I was really keen to pose this to you, really, is around, are there pieces of art that you go back to? So things perhaps that you uncovered years and years ago, but you've just consistently gone back to because it's comforting, it's sheltering, it's just something to kind of draw upon or inspire you.
I suppose it was a poem by Allen Ginsberg called Howl, which was written in 1956, and it was banned in America, which was great for him because it ended up selling 1 million copies. It starts off, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness. And I just remember that first line, and it just dragged me in, and it was just, there was no rhyme in it. It was just this stream of consciousness. And that, alongside the Tennessee Williams poem, which is a bit more gentle. So Allen Ginsberg's Howl just changed my way of thinking about writing. And I remember finding an old album of him reading that in the 50s. And that's one of my, prized, treasured possessions. So that, and I think coming up to date then, it's quite a short poem by Mary Oliver, and it's called The Journey. And I discovered that recently, after going through a divorce, really. And it was that was my second divorce. And so it was a really difficult time. And I come across this poem. I hadn't really discovered much about Mary Oliver. Sadly, she recently passed away. She was in her 70s. Just a beautiful spiritual path awakener, really. I loved her words. And it was called The Journey. And it was just it's a very short poem, which I use a lot now in my workshops, which has always touched people as well. And it's just a sense of, again, we're all on this journey, and it's okay if you fail a little bit and you fall down. You don't have to please everyone. And it comes up with these different images of this sort of journey through the night, and at the end you sort of come out, and there's a glimmer of light because you followed your own inner voice. Howl was the scream, and yes, let's get going. When I was 20. At 50, 52, 53, it was a much gentler poem. And so there's those two pieces really important to me, and stay with me till the end.
And just maybe touching on that a little bit, because I know Mary Oliver's work is something you shared in your workshops.
Yeah.
And I think that's been, it seems like, and obviously it's a conscious decision from you, but it seems like it's quite a useful mechanism for a lot of people in introducing what you're trying to achieve in some respects in your workshops. And I think that comes on to the kind of next question, is really around, you've had a history of this now, and it would be really interesting to find out, and I'm not trying to lead you down a path at all, but what do you think the relationship is between arts and health, and is it a positive relationship, and how does it differ, and how does it manifest? I realize that's an incredibly long question all of a sudden.
Okay, that's all right. And it is a really important question, I think. And there's a few strands come to my mind. First, I think there is that personal, journey of it, because I think it's no good going in. It's like as if you going in to coach football and you've never played football. It's going to be, you're not going to be the best coach, perhaps. It's not a good metaphor, but I think you get my meaning. So I think going back to when I started writing, as I said, I never thought it was a therapeutic tool. I never thought it was about healing myself. But ultimately, it was. It came out of going right back to the early days about being bullied in school and not having a voice almost, and not being able to fight as well. So what do you do? And it eventually manifested itself in words and writing and crafting, I suppose. And then, so that was the inception, I think, of writing, and give me that armor against the world, a bit of protection. And then along the way, I think, as life goes on, it deals us, grief, sadness, despair, loneliness, trauma. And at those times that I faced in my life, those sort of traumatic times, the loss of both my parents, divorce, being separated from my children, at a divorce, and having to deal with that sort of, to navigate that sort of new world at a time when, I took to writing, and I also consumed music and writing, which makes you feel, as Arthur Miller said, less alone. And I think that's such an important, simple words, 2 words. Arthur Miller said he wrote his plays to make people feel less alone. So I think at times of trauma and despair, to feel less alone in the world is really important, and it can save lives. I really believe that. And so I wrote a lot about those times that I was trying to navigate and work out, in my own life, and things would touch me that, without them, it is a lonely, cold world. I really believe taking words into a community, which I've done for 20 years. And again, a sense of sharing and just offering people, perhaps who've, again, like me when I was younger, never thought writing was for them, or that they're not worthy of building a poem, expressing themselves. Suddenly they realize, I think, yes, it's for me. I can say that. I can talk about a smell that there's, that smell exercise that I do, a smell that takes me back to my granddad's shed, and they tell a story about it, and it's beautiful. And then from that, it's not just the art. I suppose it's the sense of feeling, confident, feeling that they've shared something in a group, that someone smiles and says, "Oh, I really like that poem," or something, Dorothy in the group. So I think art is this catalyst that really opens up, I suppose, doors to our humanity and our sharing. And again, I really do believe that certain poems and words and songs can bring us back from the edge. As you know, suicide with men is probably the biggest killer of men under 40 in Britain at the moment. And so if we can utilize, the arts to try and, reach these people who have reached an end in their life, I wish I knew the magic way to do that, but I believe it can sort of, dig deep into us and save us, really.
So just following on to that, it's a question I'm keen to pose, really. Just reflecting on some of the work that you've done with the college, and you've introduced us to, and I think it says a lot for you, honestly, Patrick, you've introduced us to a core of artists who are likewise very interested and involved in community projects and see the benefit of sharing work, and the impact of art, on individuals and communities. And one thing which has come back to us, and one thing we've learned along this process, is that the mental health of artists, and the considerations for artists going out and undertaking this work, is that something that you've personally witnessed, or something that you've likewise heard from artists who are undertaking work in the community?
Yeah. I think because we're all sort of work in isolation, go off into the different groups, which can be very challenging. A lot of emotional, situations I've walked into, and you are left alone to navigate that. You may have a care assistant or someone, but there's a lot of things that people share with you, and that are quite challenging to deal with, and how, we're not therapists, and we leave that place of work to go home. Usually you might have partners, etc., but there's no real structure. You know, I remember talking to someone who every week, I think she was a psychotherapist, and she said that every week she would have a feedback session with another psychotherapist. And I thought, how wonderful would that be if artists could talk about those things they've experienced, their own mental health, how they're dealing with perhaps paying the bills, you know, and surviving, as well as their work situation. So I think, yeah, I think in a way artists are seen as a bit like lone warriors, go off and do things and they're all okay. And or if they, you know, go mad or kill themselves, that's part of the art. But which I disagree with. I think that's a tragedy, that we lose so many great artists because of mental health. And maybe it is because, and perhaps artists themselves feel themselves, we're a bit invincible. We use our struggles for our creation, so that's in a way validates it. But ultimately, I think it takes it out of people, perhaps, you know, creating these things and painting these pictures and writing these poems, which are about very, you know, desperate situations sometimes, bearing witness in a way that we forget perhaps a little bit of our own mental health, and we don't quite know where to go for it. You know, there's no structure which says, tell us about how that session went. You may have a bit of, you know, line management about a project, but usually that person is very busy as well. So I think, yeah, I think there's definitely a gap there about, as I suppose there's a gap really of all sort of mental health provision in a way, but in certain, say the NHS, you know, which they deal with much more traumatic situations, obviously, you know, particularly recently, but there's a structure there for counselling and support, perhaps, as in, you know, good employers do that. But as speaking of my own situation and artists I've talked to, yeah, where do we go really? And we do hear and see things which can be quite challenging, perhaps, for us as artists going into communities. So I think it's a very important question, really, to think about the, you know, in a way, the artistic health of a nation, perhaps.
I think it's fair to say it's a bit of a theme which has come out from some of the people you've been speaking to. And so I think it's obviously really important, but it's a theme. And just considering that kind of community of artists as well, I'd be interested to find out what really motivated you or excited you about undertaking this particular project. So having these conversations with people, particularly obviously during this time, but you know, the premise of kind of perhaps understanding other artists as well.
Yeah, and part of it maybe came out of my own sense of isolation and loneliness, you know, writing away. And a few artists I talked to felt a sense of, I suppose, everyone was creating, putting stuff on Instagram, Twitter. And I think that can sometimes have a negative impact on people, perhaps who are not as feeling that creative, or you know, Twitter universe in a way as well. It sort of sometimes diminishes art, it diminishes it, but we are made to believe it's where everything is. So I think I wanted to talk to people perhaps about the reality of their lives pre, during and post lockdown, perhaps as well. And it was a sense of perhaps reaching out to people and creating a bit of a unity. And it was nice to choose people that I respect, that I feel have worked really hard in their chosen sort of area of arts. Yeah, it was a sense of unity, I think, and seeing how we're all feeling about things, as simple as that, perhaps. And maybe again, it's that back to Arthur Miller thing, less alone. Other artists might see their words and think, oh yeah, okay, I can relate to that as well. It's not all you put one thing on Twitter and suddenly you're a success and everyone loves you. It's not as simple as that. Whereas perhaps that's the way we're made to believe. So I tried to dig a little bit into the reality of an artist's life, really. Yeah, I think so. It was a great forum.
So what have you learned about yourself during this time?
Again, that's another question I did enjoy asking people, because again, and so I did a lot of thinking about this, and wow, I've taken up yoga, which is really, it sounds a bit middle classy, bloody, that happens to us all when we hit 50. Yoga, drinking green tea, all that. But it was a bit deeper than that. It was just a sense of sort of because I was the most unsupple, stiff, aching, as I said, my back problems, and a bit skeptical of all these, hey, meet me on the mat for morning yoga, sunrise, and all that. However, when I got into it, I found there was a lot of different facets to it. And as well as the physical act of stretching and bending and all these things, which are quite hard at my age sometimes, it was a sense of calmness and mental clarity, I think, that I had neglected for a while. So that half hour in the morning watching some yoga teacher who's got amazing, they got thousands of followers, on there and subscribers. But it's almost a sense of that they were a bit scary, really, a bit like a cult. They were speaking to you and telling you to hold your heart up and all these little phrases. That's so simple, So yoga and that sense of, and tied into that, I think, has been a routine. So it's that routine which I think a lot of people have talked about. It's hard. Even though sometimes it's nice to say go on holidays and you forget your routine, I think deep down humans, we like a routine. We like something to bolster us. Mm-hmm. So it was a sense of that, really, of a bit of a routine, yoga, walking a lot more. I think, at my age, I can't run now, really. So walking and noticing things that I never noticed before, which is just the mountain behind me. Okay. So those things really, and perhaps also I realized I used to dread too much. I used to dread everything for some reason. It was crazy, which is not good. It would infest. It's like an infestation. So I tried to I read this quote. It said, "Healing is I tell you my things, Henry. Healing is just a change of perception." I found that I was dreading everything, which would build anxiety and just a sense of, maybe not, I don't know, being engaged with the world as much as I should be. So I tried to change that around a little bit, work on, a little bit of working on yourself, really. I've always been a little bit guilty working on myself, having 3 sons. I was always trying to make sure they were all right. And I just sort of stood back a little bit and looked at myself a bit and thought, oh, okay, right. How can we improve life and make yourself a little bit more peaceable, maybe welcoming to things? So it sounds as if I gone through some sort of conversion, a yogi conversion. But it's a bit of that, taking time out a little bit and working on yourself a little bit.
No, thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting. And so just an additional question that I was keen to pose again was around current work that you're involved with, and maybe that's been initiated during lockdown, maybe that's projects which were developed pre-lockdown. But what are you currently working on, and have you got any ideas for future projects as well?
A few things, really. Yeah. I suppose the pre-lockdown, which we finally finished just before March, really, was the album I've been working with James D. Bradfield about Victor Hara, which was 2 years' work, really, of writing and creating, very gentle process. And that's sort of coming out in August, which has been a really, because that sort of, in a way, that kept me a little bit sane along the way of losing both parents. And so because he wasn't really writing as such more personal things. He was writing about another's life, a tragic life. So that was in a way, that was a bit of an escape, if that makes sense, creating this album, really, with James. And it was great working with the musician. So that's taken a bit of time up, really doing a bit of, press around that and getting it all right, really. But so that's been quite a lovely moment, really. Just getting that album out. And we heard last week that Victor Hara's daughter, we managed to get the album to her, and that she had heard it and really liked it and said that her dad would be very proud, which is really touching, really emotional.
Yeah. Well, I think that's our time, Patrick. But thanks for giving up your time for this. It's been really interesting. I think it's put this work so nicely into context and just to draw upon some of your own reflections during this time as well. And the approach to your work, I think, is really, really insightful. So thank you for that. And
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.